World War I is a watershed moment in the history of humanity. It denotes a period of unprecedented levels of violence that claimed tens of millions of lives across both sides. European nations, eager to flex their military muscles, plunged the world into a horrific wave of violence. While most of us are conversant with the consequences of the war, few understand the events that led to it. That being said, Liber-Tea is keen on supplying you with all the intriguing details that mark the road to World War I. Keep listening to find out. World War I is one of the bloodiest and most shameful undertakings humanity has ever engaged in. As such, it is no surprise that the movie Wonder Woman takes several creative liberties to explain the events preceding it. For instance, the movie tries to portray Ares, the god of war, as the cause of the war. In reality, the bloodbath that ensued from 1914 to 1918 had nothing to do with the gods. Ordinary people and politicians masterminded the war. The war was so violent, traumatic, and costly that it is tempting to blame some god. This article will discuss, among other things, the events preceding the Great War and why the U.S. stayed neutral before joining the Allied powers. To understand the origins of the Great War, we must go back to the early 1800s. For a long time, a competing patchwork of kingdoms and empires in Europe waged near constant war with each other. The reasons for these battles varied from land, resources, colonies, and religion to dynastic rivalries. Due to this state of matters, borders within Europe often shifted. After many campaigns to subdue the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, several representatives from different European powers met in Vienna in 1814 and 1815 to discuss how to end the repeating cycles of war. The meetings resulted in a series of agreements that ushered in an unprecedented period of relative peace and stability within continental Europe. The resulting diplomatic system is popularly known as the Concert of Europe, which endeavored to preserve the peace and stability of the continent while supporting its dynasties over revolutionary forces. Due to the peace, Europe enjoyed a century of progress in all aspects, including global influence. The Industrial Revolution, which started in Britain, spread across the continent and enriched it tremendously. Conversely, the advancement of shipping, weaponry, and railways enabled European powers to project their influence abroad. European countries including France, Britain, Netherlands, Belgium, Russia, Germany, and Italy controlled the world through the 19th century. Unfortunately, this period of European prosperity and peace was short-lived. According to some historians, during the mid-1800s, things began to unravel due to numerous wars and regional conflicts to unite Italy and Germany. Unequivocally, the Great War brought the period of peace and prosperity within the continent to an explosive end. The Napoleonic Wars caused a rough balance of power within Europe. As such, Europe's great powers avoided armed conflict with each other because they were equally strong. The cost of war would be greater than its benefits. Initially, the strength of Russia, Britain, and Austria maintained peace within the continent. Later, Prussia and Britain maintained peace and order as Europe's most powerful nations. The two countries had large populations, robust economies, and strong militaries. However, during the mid-19th century, power dynamics shifted. The power of Britain as the largest empire and economy in the world began to fade. Countries like Germany and the U.S. began to industrialize rapidly, outcompeting Britain, which had a manufacturing and technological edge over other nations. In 1871, Germany emerged as an independent nation following the unification of 39 independent states. The new country benefited immensely from industrialization and began to project its influence across the globe. For example, it acquired colonies in Africa. While Otto von Bismarck, Germany's leader, strived to maintain peace within Europe, later leaders strived to assert German dominance without considering the consequences of their actions. Kaiser Wilhelm II, for instance, spoke openly and belligerently about his ambition to assert Germany's military supremacy. He worked tirelessly to make this a reality. The Kaiser spent heavily on the military, looking to make a navy that would outshine Britain's navy. This rapid militarization caused a security dilemma, which led to an arms race. The period before the Great War is characterized by fierce nationalism within Europe. While nationalism can ignite national unity, its extremes fuel global disorder, division, and violence. Before World War I commenced, nationalism caused intense competition among European nations. Europe's most powerful nations constantly tried to outshine each other in innovation and military supremacy. Additionally, through mass media, schools, and universities, each government reinforced messages of its superiority. The memories of Napoleonic Wars made governments believe the quickest way to dominance and glory was through warfare. In fact, some celebrated the start of World War II. Young men, eager to serve their nations, rushed to recruiting offices. Most people thought the war would end as soon as it began. They were highly misguided. It is a widely accepted fact that the assassination of Franz Ferdinand did not directly affect the affairs of Europe's great powers. It ought to have remained as a small, localized issue between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. However, European governments had spent considerable time and resources creating alliances anchored on collective security prior to the assassination. Theoretically, these alliances acted as deterrents to conflict. In reality, these alliances achieved the opposite. They caused a local issue to escalate into a global crisis. From behind Serbia stood Russia, behind Austria-Hungary stood Germany, and behind Russia stood France and Britain. A week after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, Germany pledged its unconditional support to Austria. This blank check assurance caused Austria-Hungary to declare war on Serbia. A few days later, Russia, Germany, and France made their individual cascading declarations of war. Thus, continental Europe was engulfed in war. The U.S. has always utilized the doctrine of isolation to seclude itself from international responsibility and entanglements. Splendid isolation is one of the many political dogmas the U.S. has clung to with little success. Before entering the war, the U.S. focused on streamlining its social, political, and economic issues. The U.S. government worked tirelessly to establish itself as a dominant and viable country in North America. Additionally, the absence of predatory neighbors helped enhance its social, economic, and cultural dominance. However, towards the close of the 19th century, it developed an interest in international affairs. Its victory in the Spanish-American War secured its control of Puerto Rico and Cuba and far-off Guam and the Philippine Islands. Immediately after World War I broke out, the U.S. declared its neutrality. Most Americans preferred that it should stay out of European matters. On the other hand, President Woodrow Wilson was committed to ensuring that the U.S. remained impartial in European affairs in both action and thoughts. The nation was more focused on its internal issues rather than international affairs. Additionally, most Americans have a European heritage. On the one side, many Americans supported the Allied forces due to shared heritage and language. They were also sympathetic to the French, who had been a close ally of the country since the American Revolution. Irish Americans opposed the British, and German Americans were sympathetic to their motherland. Public anger against Germans increased when they invaded Belgium. U.S. outrage exploded when the Germans sunk the passenger liner Lusitania, which killed 1,198 people, including 128 Americans. However, despite all these, public support for the war was minimal. In fact, Woodrow Wilson's peaceful position was reinforced when he was re-elected under the slogan, "He kept us out of war." Surprisingly, 4 months after assuming office, Woodrow Wilson prevailed over Congress to issue a declaration of war. World War I marks a critical period in human history. Industrialization brought new weapons, machinery, and tactics into warfare. These greatly enhanced the killing power of soldiers. Battlefield conditions were as chaotic as they were horrific. Soldiers faced bombs, bullets, bayonet charges, and gas on each side. Join us in our next Liber-Tea and share your thoughts in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for joining us through this exhilarating walk through history.